Welcome back to the Game Collection. I'm SuperDerek and, it's been too long since I gave my Sega Genesis some love. I don't mean to neglect the big old chonker, but when your main focus is RPGs, thoughts about the 16-bit era tend to gravitate more toward the Super Nintendo classics like Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger and Earthbound and all those great games that everybody already knows. But the Sega Genesis does have some really great games that sadly tend to be overlooked, and this is one of those games. I am SuperDerek, and this is Crusader of Centy. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, while not an RPG itself, was a game that acted as my gateway into RPGs. Zelda was a big deal, and if Sonic was an answer to Nintendo's Mario, then what was Sega's answer to Zelda? On the Sega Master System, that was probably Golden Axe Warrior, a game I'll take a look at another day, but on Genesis, well, that's where Crusader of Centy comes in. Crusader of Centy, also known as Soleil in PAL territories, was released in Japan as Shin Soseki Ragna Centy. The game was developed by Nextech and published by Sega in Japan, then localized and published in the West by Atlus in 1995. The story of how this game came to be is extremely interesting and perhaps best understood by checking out the Gaming Historian's video on the title, but before you do, let's go take a look at Crusader of Centy and try to understand how this game came to sell for over $400 for a loose copy. The opening cinematic of Crusader of Centy is a brief lore dump explaining how the world was once shrouded in darkness and monsters roamed the plains. But one day, a light appeared which drove the monsters underground as they couldn't survive within the light. This ushered in the dawn of the Age of Man. But now, monsters have begun leaving the shadows and conflicts between man and monsters are increasing. It is in this world that our game begins, with our unfortunately named protagonist, Corona, enjoying a small party with his friends on his 14th birthday. It is the local custom of the Kingdom of Soleil that at his age, boys become men and are given swords and shields with which to begin their training. Corona's mother explains that the sword and shield he is being given belonged to his late father, who fell during battle against the monsters. Our hero is to take this sword and shield and complete the trials and his training. However, a mysterious meeting with a fortune teller renders Corona unable to communicate with other human beings, but in turn gains the ability to talk to plants and animals. The story within Crusader of Centy is overall a pretty simplistic one. It's a straightforward action-adventure title with relatively low stakes, but it is a pretty unique story. At no point are you saving the world from destruction or saving a princess. You don't really have to collect 7 magical MacGuffins either. However, it often feels like the lack of these driving forces and motivations kind of muddles the water about what you should be trying to accomplish at any given point. The story progression is a pretty meandering one where most of what drove me from point A to point B was exploration for exploration's sake, and actively seeking out whatever I was supposed to stumble into next. Crusader of Centy offers very little overt direction and frequently locks the next areas off until you've spoken to the right NPC the right number of times. And for the record, whenever you are stuck, just make sure you talk to every NPC in the game all over again, and you will likely soon find yourself unstuck. However, while the game provides very little in terms of direction, it does excel in delivering some unique moments of darkness, often glossed over in other action-adventure series, moments that reminded me quite a bit of the Quintet saga. The game explores interesting themes that challenge the concept of what monsters are and who heroes are and what the fighting is really all about. In Crusader of Centy, innocent people are dying, and the story is surprisingly a tragic one, especially in stark contrast to the tone of the rest of the bright and colorful game. This slight discordance and juxtaposition of dramatic with a cheerful backdrop is something seen and felt from the very beginning of the title. As neat as this clash of happy-go-lucky/Spartan society is, I do surprisingly have to take some points off in its execution due to a rough localization. It can be difficult to understand what some characters are trying to convey, and the fact that some NPCs have changing messages means that sometimes you cannot reread what they just said in order to try to suss out the context of their speech. I suspect that this rough localization also contributed significantly to the feeling of a lack of guidance as you progress through the game. On the subject of the gameplay though, Crusader of Centy is pretty good. Chrono controls a little slowly at first, as you can probably see. The sword swing animation is a leisurely arc in comparison to Link to the Past. The overall moveset is also pretty limited off the top of the game, but you soon unlock the ability to throw your sword like a boomerang, and this is where the real gameplay begins. To throw your sword, just press and hold the attack button and then release it to send the sword flying. It'll shoot out in whatever direction you're facing and will automatically home back to you, similar to how boomerangs work in Link to the Past. Throughout the game, Corona also has the ability to talk to and recruit animal friends who can be equipped to affect how your sword behaves, or how Corona controls. Equipping one animal might give your sword fire elemental magic affinity, or another animal might give you super speed or swing your sword faster, or it lets your sword ricochet around corners, and others will revive you one time. To continue the comparisons to Link to the Past, these animals are effectively stand-ins for the unique equipment that Link would normally find in various dungeons. However, the especially interesting bit is that you can equip any two animal companions at a time, which might allow for synergistic effects. Equipping fire and ice at the same time, for instance, gives you ultimate magic. I do feel like sometimes the enemy hitboxes are a little bit loosey-goosey though, which definitely took some time to get used to, especially with the slower sword swing and all. And also, lots of enemies were able to get in some hits that felt like cheap shots, but it was something that I did eventually get used to. There are lots of animation frames to walking and attacking that made the controls feel a little bit floaty. So while the game shares a lot of mechanics and aesthetics with Link to the Past, know before going in that it doesn't quite feel like Link to the Past. The world design is well varied. I found myself enjoying traversing through rugged mountains, fiery volcanoes, winter wonderlands and sweltering deserts, tropical beaches, and plenty of other really nice unique environments. Traversing between these environments plays out a bit more like Final Fantasy Mystic Quest or maybe Super Mario World, where you have this overworld map with roads that are predefined for you to walk along, and selecting different areas allows you to enter into those areas. It's an interesting blend of styles that isn't unpleasant, but it does feel a bit restrictive in comparison to its main contemporary. Crusader of Centy really starts to shine in the audio department though. The Sega Genesis tends to get a lot of flack for having lackluster audio in comparison to the Super Nintendo, but let it be known that that has far more to do with lazy implementation by game developers and a lot less to do with the system's capabilities. Several tracks within Crusader of Centy are memorable as heck and catchy and will definitely get stuck in your head. Particularly the main town theme is something that I've been humming to myself for weeks. Visually, Crusader of Centy is also pretty darn stunning. There are so many frames of animation that just make it look and feel quality, even if that might contribute to some of that floaty feeling of the gameplay that I mentioned a little bit ago. It's smooth, the colors are bright and colorful. It's the perfect example of how great a Sega Genesis title can look and sound. And I suspect that these two aspects are by far the biggest reason that the game has become so crazy expensive over the years. According to price charting as of the time of this review, Crusader of Centy will cost you about $420 for a loose copy. The game is crazy expensive and pretty darn rare, but every time people see and hear it, they gotta try it, and I would definitely recommend trying it before deciding to buy it. This game is an answer to all of the criticisms about how the Sega Genesis games just look muddy and sound farty, and how there's no RPGs. Centy is an oddball because it doesn't look like it belongs on the Genesis, yet at the same time it exhibits a lot of the best qualities that the Sega Genesis has to offer. Plus, it was published by Atlus back in the day on the Genesis, long before Sega owned Atlus, which is also just kind of neat to think about.
Well anyway, is Crusader of Centy actually worth $400? Probably not. But honestly, what kind of game would actually be worth $400? I can't really think of any. Crusader of Centy was really just meant to be a link to the past on the Sega Genesis, and in that regard, I'd say it kinda delivers. I would have absolutely loved this game if I had it back in the day for my Sega Genesis instead of, Green Dog. And perhaps in an alternate universe, this game could have been the game that helped spark my love for RPGs instead of Link to the Past. It's a rarity, an oddity, and with a few dark moments that really caught me off guard, and I kinda love it for that. And that's why Crusader of Centy has easily earned itself a spot in the Game Collection.
The Game Collection is a viewer-supported show. If you enjoyed this review, please consider subscribing. For live streams of my playthroughs, follow me on Twitch. And thank you for watching.